As part of We the People, celebrating 250 years, here's This Day in History.
All right, the celebration rolls on for America's 250th birthday. We are sharing our We the People series, people, places, and things that have made our country great. And avert your eyes, Bears fans, the bane of your existence. Born on this day, right? Decades ago.
Packers' birthday on this day, August 11th. Back in 1919, the most storied franchise in the NFL was founded in Green Bay. The franchise came to be in editorial rooms of the old Green Bay Press-Gazette building. There had been no announcement of the meeting beforehand, and the Press-Gazette did not say preliminary work had been finished before the meeting, or if the meeting itself triggered a rapid-fire chain of events that led to the Packers becoming a team. It wasn't until 2 days later that the team would be referred to as the Packers for the first time, after it was revealed that the Indian Packing Company would sponsor the team. The Press-Gazette announced that the Packers would play home games at Hagmeister Park. The paper listed 38 prospective candidates for the team, mostly former standouts at Green Bay East and Green Bay West high schools, and noted that full uniforms would be given to 20 players. A second meeting was held at the Press-Gazette on August 14th, and nearly 25 players were in attendance. Curly Lambeau was elected captain of the team, and George Whitney Calhoun named the manager. That's this day in history for August 11th.
And that's why I scream at my TV every Sunday for the past 20 years and during the fall and winter months, right?
Right. Yeah, born in the editorial room.
Cool.
At the Green Bay Press-Gazette.
Yeah, rich history for the Green Bay Packers. Charlie, thank you.